And welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, we have another in the Future of Texas podcast series in partnership with Texas 2036, where we explore the decisions shaping our state between now and the bicentennial in 2036. Today, we're asking a simple but powerful question. What does it actually take to raise a family in Texas today, and what will still hold up over the next decade? Because if Texas is going to remain the best place to live, work, and raise a family, that promise has to show up in real life. Can families afford to stay? Do they feel safe? Are their kids on a path to opportunity? Few leaders are closer to these questions than our guest today. Mayor Mattie Parker leads Fort Worth, one of the fastest growing large cities in the country, now home to more than 1 million residents and counting. Her work has focused on public safety, economic mobility, and ensuring growth works for families. She's joined by AJ Rodriguez, Executive Vice President of Texas 2036, bringing a statewide perspective on what Texas must get right over the next decade and beyond. Mayor Parker, AJ, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Nice to meet you, Brad. Pleasure.
Good morning.
AJ, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
It's great to be here. This studio is just mildly better than mine.
Is it? Will they put you in a dungeon or something?
It is a dungeon. It's in the basement.
Sorry. Well, we've got good sunlight here. So
Okay. Well, I guess this is my Fort Worth.
Good Fort Worth
studio now.
vibes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for both of you being here. I think that all three of us are parents. I have 3 children. I think both of you have 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
Mayor Parker, I want to start with you and sort of just get a perspective from. I mean, there's probably not that many people that are busier than you, but also have being a family person, being a mom.
Sure.
How do you balance that?
Well, honestly, I kind of get this question a lot, and my answer is usually I balance it the same way everyone tries to. When you're a working professional, your family comes first.
Yeah.
The juggle can be real. Some days you feel like you've got it figured out, and the next day you realize I don't got it figured out, and it takes a tremendous amount of support.
True.
But I think I've considered it a privilege to be in this office during this time in my life and raising a family, my husband and I, and attempt to bring a real positive awareness around raising children in Texas, raising children here in Fort Worth, and that it should be a balance, and that our efforts and my professional career and focus really is about making this place even better for the next generation, specifically for my own children. So, I'm a busy lady, that's for sure. But I guess I would tell you I probably wouldn't have it any other way. And it's a privileged position to be in to get to serve as mayor of this awesome city.
Yeah. Well, I've only heard great things, so you must be doing something.
You're
right.
probably not talking to everybody. I could give you a few to talk to.
It comes with the job, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yes.
I guess. Why start with families? Why are families important to Texas? I mean, it seems like maybe an obvious question as people who, as parents ourselves, but why is that unit so important to the future of Texas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm curious what AJ's perspective is. Obviously, to me, that's the entire reason Texas 2036 was created, right? To really raise awareness on what makes the Texas miracle so special, but specifically how do we protect that for Texas families? I think I would say that in Fort Worth, that is a priority here. I mean, we have long since in this community had a responsibility to the people that live here. And frankly, I think it's working. That's why you see us as one of the fastest growing cities in the country, that we're now over 1 million people. And we want to have a focus on quality of life for all of our residents and all of our families here in the city. And then, most especially right now, because there's so much conversation around affordability and housing and healthcare and all of those things, those are central to a family's ability to be successful and strong. And I can't control what happens across the country nor across Texas. But in Fort Worth, I do think we have an ability to direct policies that try to mitigate those things that are deterrents for people having healthy families. And in Fort Worth, we want to be a leader in that. And I think we absolutely are today.
Yeah. AJ?
Well, I agree with Mayor Parker completely. I think from my perspective, having been in San Antonio now 6 generations with my kids in the same home, for that matter.
6 generations in the same home?
Same home. My
AJ, that's
grandfather
amazing.
bought it like 1950, and my dad grew up there since he was 8. Now he's 82, I think, Dad, maybe younger. So, but so that home means a lot to us. But every single generation, in my mind, the entire intention was that every single generation did better and had more opportunities than the next one. That's been my experience, and so having the lens of family is so critical, I think, because it's not just about data. I mean, for us, it is all about the data in many ways in terms of data driven solutions. Our founder says without data, you're just another person with an opinion. But that data is things like how is our GDP growing, what's happening in our economy, how many corporate relocations are we having, which Fort Worth has had several. But it's also about the faces that are behind the data. In my mind, the people that are behind the data, ensuring those people have the prosperity and the quality of life. And that's why I appreciate leaders like Mayor Parker, Mayor Parker, that have been able to think about economic prosperity, economic development, and also quality of life and families and their prosperity and their opportunity, and combine those, because you can't really separate them in that way. So that's why I think that Texas 2036, it's about the best place to live and work and raise a family, has been our vision for quite some time. And we could have stopped at just live and work. I think that raise a family is a critical element and ingredient in that formula for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, for so many people living and working, it's not much without a family, right? So, I mean, there's plenty of people without it, and that's but a lot of people, they go to work and they do that so that they can raise a family, and that's it's an important part. Without future families, we don't have a future Texas.
Well, I think that the conversation also is more enhanced right now because of Texas's growth, and you're importing so much talent from all over the country, really all over the world. Tremendous amount of domestic migration, especially post-COVID. I mean, Fort Worth was growing for the last 10 plus years, or more so, 20 plus years, but you've really seen it enhance recently. But because of that, there's an important question: is Texas and Texas's economy working for Texans?
That's right.
Those families like yours, AJ, that have lived here for generations. I have a very similar story in my own family, and I do think, as policymakers, I take that responsibility, as something that I should take seriously, and making sure that we're balancing all this opportunity and welcoming people from all over the world. We want that success, but we also want to take care of our homegrown folks that are right here in Fort Worth and in Texas. And sometimes those policy levers you need to really re-examine, and I'm sure we'll get into this conversation, which is why Texas 2036 exists, right? How are we doing on education policy and water policy, all of these things that really do dovetail into how are Texas families doing and thriving.
Yeah. So, Mayor Parker, in your position, I'm sure you have the opportunity to speak to a lot of families, and probably new families, old families, of all ages, all stripes, all backgrounds. Is there a common thread when they talk about quality of life and the things that they want?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time. And
I've heard.
Right? And despite
I've tried to.
Some people try to be fancy about it, or they try to approach things. But ironically, when I became mayor, I learned that I was going to be most successful in how I communicated if I focused on, to your point, everyone is a person, is a human being, is a part of a family. And it doesn't matter if it's a CEO of a major corporation, or if it's a teacher in a classroom, or if it's a resident that comes to speak to us at public comment. Even when what they're telling me is hard to hear, there's a human being on the other side of that.
Yep.
And as mayor, it's really important that I try to listen as much as possible and then make the tough decisions, right? And try to consider all of those things. And I hope it makes me a more empathetic leader. And I've also attempted to use my busy season of life and being a mom with young children to be sort of a superpower, right? Because my perspective is unique. And when I was elected, I was 37 and I had a 5-year-old. There were not very many of us across the country that could say that. In fact, I was the youngest mayor of a large city elected.
Yep.
I didn't wear that as a badge of honor. I wore that as a responsibility. Man, I can't mess this up, right?
Sure.
Because then the rhetoric will be, see, working moms can't do it all. But importantly, use that to reflect on what every other Texan, Fort Worth, American family is experiencing. We're all juggling, and we all have that responsibility. And I think it has helped me lead and keep my priorities on quality of life in all aspects of what I try to support as a mayor.
Yeah. How old are your children?
Now the boys are 9, 15, and then we have an older daughter who's 24. And I was joking with an audience yesterday, you have children, you should have measuring how tall they get. Like our 15-year-old now is 6'2".
Oh, geez.
And when, I was elected mayor and he introduced me, he was, all of 5'4" or something like that.
You've been feeding him right.
I guess so. That's what he says. So, yeah.
Right. So we should talk about sort of, I guess, the beginning of life. To start a family, you got to have kids. And, that starts there's a lot of different ways to do it, but generally at the hospital, healthcare, that sort of stuff. What is the situation now with mother and infant care at the beginning of life, and where do we need to go?
Well, I think as Texans, I'm not at all going to pretend to be the only policy leader that's concerned about this. We have great attention on these issues returning to maternal and infant health in Texas. But I do think we are in a moment where we need to take seriously how we take care of our most vulnerable. And as someone who has delivered 2 children and understands that experience, there's probably no moment you are more vulnerable than when you've delivered a child and you're responsible for an infant and your own health care. And I want to be the state, I want to be the city where we take care of our moms and babies the best anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And we're not there yet. And I think the work that we've done through our Tarrant County Maternal Health and Infant Coalition that's now grown across North Texas as this accelerator model, working with the legislature this last session, raising over $23.5 million to really raise awareness around what maternal health and infant care really should look like, I hope can become a model for the state of Texas. And at its core, it's to your data. Like, let's start with understanding where we've fallen short. And in Tarrant County in Texas, we have some of the worst outcomes for maternal health in the country. Tarrant County is not immune to that either. So important people in our community that could do something about it started asking those questions. And we created this coalition of hospital CEOs, nonprofits, NGOs, clinicians, asking what can we do differently, which ultimately led to us working across North Texas now with every major healthcare system from Dallas to Fort Worth, UT Southwestern, JPS, led of course by TCU's amazing Burnett School of Medicine and their dean there, Stuart Flynn. To really focus a new model around maternal health. And as a result, I know at my core, we are saving lives and we are changing healthcare for women and babies in North Texas. And the great thing is we're not hiding the ball, right? We want to share this data and information. And we've now kind of started a roadshow with legislative leaders, working with Health and Human Services, and started to think about what this model looks like. Rather than go into all the details, because that would be a whole podcast about this, the interventions can be quite simple.
Yeah.
And working with clinicians in North Texas, we discovered the critical importance of iron supplementation at those prenatal appointments for moms to help prevent postpartum hemorrhaging by up to 50% can occur when you provide a mom with iron supplements that are actually designed for her needs.
Yeah.
And so now we have a very robust iron supplement deployment across North Texas at multiple sites. And it's in real time. I don't know about you, but especially when you're pregnant and you're trying to juggle life and the doctor says, hey, go get this prescription for iron supplements, the actual return on that happening is quite low.
Yeah.
So we cut that out, and now we're providing free supplements to these women. And as a result, you're seeing tremendous outcomes in the delivery room. And that's just one of the many interventions that we're providing through this accelerator process.
Sometimes it's as simple as that.
Yeah. But to your core question, why does that matter? Why should policymakers care? Because we want in Texas to have the best quality of life. We can brag all we want about being the 8th largest GDP in the country, in the world, and all of our economic development progress. But if you aren't taking care of the cycle of life and taking care of women and babies, you won't be successful long term. It's not a state I would want to raise my family in, and it's really hard to sell businesses on relocating. And we're doing something about it, which I'm really proud of.
Yeah. So AJ, on a more on a state level, state policy level, what are y'all seeing at Texas 2036 as far as mother and infant health across the state?
Yeah, first I'd like just to comment on the extraordinary efforts that you've made here, Mayor, with locally. And I think you see this in a lot of different places throughout the state and regionally, where individual municipalities and leaders work to address issues that are impacting their communities in a substantial manner. And what I love about that is that you're so open. It's an open book for you. And I think that's so critical in terms of our state's success because of the scalable opportunities that we can reach across our vast state. We're 31.7 million people today. 7.7 million of those people are kids, 18 and under. So a fourth of our population, 1 in 4 Texans, is a kid in Texas, are kids in Texas that we want to take care of. And as Mayor Parker said, I think there's health care and child care and housing. All those things are intertwined in terms of taking care of those children and making sure that they have opportunities for the future. And so programs like the ones that were mentioned in terms of maternal health, postpartum health. We've done a lot at the state level in terms of extending care for postpartum care. It was 2 months at one point.
Medicaid
We changed
was 3 to
legislation
12,
to 12 months in terms of postpartum care. But to me, it's really critical because we have this significant population that is essentially our future that we've got to take care of.
Yeah. So beyond, the 12-month postpartum care, talking about, great program, free iron supplementation, reduce the hemorrhaging, all that's really great. But, what about health for families beyond that? Toddlers, elementary school, middle school, high school. We're talking about everyone 18 and under, basically. 17 and under? Mm-hmm. 18 and under. The state has a pretty big hand in their health, whether we like it or not, through school lunch programs or breakfast or whatever. Where are we there? How are there improvements that we need to make in that area so that when we reach that bicentennial in 2036, we're thriving?
Well, I'll start just with our educational system. I think it's critical there. And I've mentioned this before on more than one occasion, that everything I needed to know about your leadership was when you addressed Fort Worth ISD and the schools in this area and said we've got to do better for our future. I thought that was really critical in terms of it's not necessarily in the purview or in the lane of the city budget, but it definitely impacts the city. I was fortunate enough the other day to be working virtually at a city park, and you know how important parks are in terms of quality of life here locally and in San Antonio for that matter. And I was watching kids play around the playground and parents chasing them around. And it just, to me, it demonstrated that the more vibrant that is, the more active that is, there's an indirect correlation with your city budget. There's an indirect correlation with your city bond rating in the future in terms of the way in which your city does. I think there's so much opportunity there where you have cities that are stagnating because families are leaving for other opportunity, or you have cities that are growing at a pace that they can't keep up from an infrastructure standpoint or otherwise. And then you have cities like Fort Worth that are directly looking at the problems of the city, trying to address those locally with intentionality and not just responding to what that population change is like. So we can take that and scale it across the entire state. We'd all be better for that.
Yeah.
Well, and healthcare whole health is multifaceted, and there are certain levers that policy leaders control and don't control. The private sector, I mean, y'all know this. Everyone is arguing over what affordability for healthcare should look like. Yeah. Despite a lot of attention and detail, we're still not there as a country. And I think we have a long way to go. I think that's the power in think tanks like Texas 2036 that force convening people from different party lines and different perspectives to try to solve complex problems. And in city government, you can only control certain things. And so to your point, the built environment that is so important for whole health, goals around a 10-minute walk to park for all of our residents here in Fort Worth, conservation of our open space and our tree canopy here in the city. I don't know anybody that doesn't want clean air and clean water and beautiful trees to sit under. And so try to take the controversy out where possible and then focus on policies that really do improve quality of life for residents. And I think that ultimately does lead to healthier cities. And then there are other complex problems around food insecurity and availability for families, and how you have safety net systems. Tarrant Area Food Bank is a wonderful partner here, and how they work with our school districts to feed families. And these are all very complex issues that, as policy leaders, we have to be knowledgeable of and know when to step in, and also know when to ask for partnership and help from local community. And I think, again, Texas 2036 is a great convening place for those conversations.
And before this, Mayor Parker led Tarrant 2 and through. T3 is the partnership here in Fort Worth, which is this incredible, education to workforce pipeline mechanism and focus. And it'd be great if you commented on that, because we, as part of the Dallas Fed, I sit on the Advance Together team, and it gave me the opportunity, a window to really learn a lot more about what T3 is doing. Their goal of getting 200 students into family-sustained wage jobs, I think is really critical for the future of the city.
Well, big picture is the state is really grappling with this, is to understand the critical importance of making sure our students in high schools and honestly in elementary schools today have a pathway to college, career, military success. The credentialing is now the really the nomenclature, the language we need to use. No longer are we only talking about a 4-year degree. We want all of our high school students in Fort Worth to have that opportunity to attain a 2-year or 4-year credential when they graduate high school. Why? Not because it makes us feel good, because that's really what the ticket is to a living wage, and education is that great equalizer. These are complex problems that well, rather, I think they're actually quite simple to solve. It just takes systems to really change behavior and reinforce what works for students and meet families where they are. When we started Tarrant 2 and 3, we started with the data to understand that only 26% of our students in our middle schools at the time were attaining a 2-year or 4-year credential within 6 years of high school graduation.
That's about 30% statewide.
Absolutely. And then you break it down by economic status, only 13% of your low-income students. That's not sustainable, nor is it acceptable.
Yeah.
And we have a moral imperative to change that narrative and change that reality for our students. All of these problems we talk about as a state, if someone is educated and has a great paying job, they have access to health care, they can afford a house, they can have a family, and all of these problems start to sort of dissipate. It's not the silver bullet, but it is the answer. And so I do think that the nuances of what the state government has started to do, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, the goals set in place by the governor, work by TEA, the legislature on a bipartisan basis, they've all are starting to talk about the need for Texas to think differently about our bicentennial, the 2036 number that's coming up. What does credentialing need to look like? Because it's important for our economy, but it's also important for Texas families to get there. And you're seeing, I appreciate you mentioning T3, you've got efforts across the state that all look a little bit different and more nuanced. But the healthy thing is we are re-examining what it looks like to make sure our students in our high schools are graduating with more than a high school diploma. In fact, just next week, we'll celebrate our own students here in Fort Worth, over 600 kids from all of our high schools that will graduate with a credential or a degree or an associate's degree in Fort Worth. And we celebrate them in this mayor celebration just like you would if you're going off to an Ivy League school. I think that's really important for our students to feel that support.
Or becoming a D1 athlete or
Absolutely.
whatever.
It deserves, it's signing day for them.
Because 90% of our kids are graduating high school, but only 30-somewhat% are actually getting that post-secondary credential. And in Fort Worth, it was lower. I think in San Antonio, Bexar County, it's lower. And 70% of the jobs by our bicentennial are going to require some type of post-secondary credential in terms of.
And I remember when y'all started, that to me was the clarion call. You're working on a lot of different policy areas, but that issue around what it looks like to have an economic successful story based on what our needs are, that 70% number always stuck in my head.
Well, what always stuck in my head is that you can import talent, but you can't export poverty.
It's very true.
Those are your words that from our Texas Legislative Conference a couple of weeks ago. I think I've said that quote now 10 times or since then.
Yeah.
So I hope this is not too basic or silly of a question, but we've brought up quality of life numerous times, and we've sort of defined it on the edges with a lot of different metrics. You mentioned getting a good paying job, you can afford healthcare, house, family, all that stuff. You mentioned, parks, improving quality of life. Everyone wants clean air. I mean, there's so many different metrics that we're sort of throwing into quality of life, but it also, if the whole city was a park, I don't know how my quality of life would be, right?
Or a highway for that matter.
Or a highway, exactly. There's some sort of happy medium, and maybe it's different for every single person. But just real briefly, can we pause and just sort of define, in your, especially you, Mayor Parker, being in the position that you're in, how do people, say, in Fort Worth, how are they measuring quality of life? What does it take for them to say, okay, my quality of life is improving?
Yeah. Well, I think this sounds simple, but are they also having fun as a family? Are they in a place where they're enjoying life?
I'm glad you said
the
that.
Grind, right?
Yeah, because
exactly.
I mean, what's more important than being happy?
I mean, Fort Worth is a fun place to live, and life can be complicated, but generally people have a choice of what kind of neighborhood they want to live in, what their priorities are, where they want to work, where they want to go to school. And giving families autonomy, I think, is incredibly important in choice about those opportunities. Do they feel like upward mobility is possible for them? Do they feel like their American dream is possible? Not everybody's dream is the same, right? And Fort Worth has this rich, diverse culture, which I also think is incredibly important to quality of life. And then for city government, you got to focus on the basics, guys. You got to have police and firefighters and streets and focus on litter abatement, and the trash needs to get picked up on time. And as much as people think that that's not interesting, it's real interesting when it doesn't get done. And I think American cities that aren't paying attention to the basics, they're the ones that are losing population. They're the places where people don't have a high quality of life. They don't enjoy being there. And so therefore, if they can, they pick up and leave. And in Fort Worth, we want to be a place of choice. And we want to keep people that are really proud to live here. And I think our focus from a policy perspective here at City Hall is a real reflection of our success,
Yeah.
and we want to keep it that way.
So that's a I think it's a great answer, and I appreciate a lot of that because but it's very city focused, which is your area of expertise. But I want to get maybe your area of expertise is probably wider than that. But AJ, I wanted to get your perspective from a more statewide level, and dealing with policymakers. How do they see quality of life and improving that from a state perspective?
Well, I think you can broaden and amplify what you said, Mayor, across the entire state in terms of every city and community, once what you described in a profound way. But I think what you hear most often, and as I've mentioned before, going from all parts of the state on our Texas tour, we were here in Fort Worth, I guess, about 2 months ago, and we get to see a lot of communities and talk to them. What keeps coming up is affordability in some shape or form.
Yeah.
Whether that's childcare, which now costs a family $11,000 on average a year.
Might as well go to college.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a single household family that makes $40,000 a year, I mean, you're talking about a significant part of your budget. That's like a choice between childcare and rent.
Yeah.
In many instances. So, healthcare, as the mayor alluded to earlier, we got a population that's 17% covered from a health insurance perspective. We're the worst in the country in that regard. We've got to improve that. We're doing our best working with our state legislature to make pushes on covering more people and making healthcare more affordable over time in terms of consumer transparency, et cetera. But you look at housing affordability, for instance, is also really resonating and coming up quite a bit in conversation. It's risen 40% just in like 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years. Pricing on average of Texas houses has gone up 40%. I think the median value is like $330 somewhat thousand now. I mean, that's a big change based on what it used to be, from Texas being kind of this place where it was a lower cost of living, and it had some attraction from that aspect. And that's the first thing that corporations ask about when they're relocating is, number one, can I get the workforce? And number two, do they have an affordable place to live? So those are the kinds of issues that we're hearing statewide. But as you also mentioned, I think the quality of life goes along with that. There's this economic opportunity and competitiveness that we've got to follow. But we also, so that's about attraction, and bringing families in. But then you want to keep them and retain them, and that's that quality of life and that happiness happiness quotient, so to speak, that we're looking for.
Yeah, the HQ. So on affordability, Mayor Parker, I don't know if you're in the same position. I live in Austin, so Mayor Watson probably gets, housing is talked about a lot in Austin. Maybe it's the same in Fort Worth, but y'all are growing so fast, I imagine it is. I don't envy Mayor Watson's position. I'm sure he gets a lot of nasty emails when it comes to housing and affordability. Maybe you do too. But how do you balance all of the different needs on housing affordability? I mean, everyone says just build more, right? And that would fix the problem. But I think it's
more complicated.
More complicated than that.
Yeah.
And there's, I know in Austin, a lot of places, they don't want more in their neighborhood. They're fine with more somewhere else. As a mayor, how do you balance all that?
Yeah, I mean, NIMBYism is absolutely something that every mayor, city council has to deal with.
Sure.
Affordable housing has been a topic of any great policy leader in cities in Texas for a long time. Austin maybe just is more enhanced because the cost of living has gone so high there for so long because of their success, right? People wanted to live there. I think they've tried to balance as best they can, but it's quite complicated. And quite frankly, there's also limited levers that, in my opinion, with limited government, really smart fiscal decisions, that a city should even be playing in this category. Because the reality is right now, inflation, labor, and materials is the biggest driver for why housing is so expensive.
Yeah.
And, we attempt in Fort Worth from a zoning and a regulatory standpoint to keep those barriers as low as possible. We are, in fact, this May, we have a bond election for the first time in a small referendum of $10 million to focus on affordable housing, that we think we kind of nibble around the edges and really partner differently with private sector around affordable housing, incentivizing tax credit projects where it makes sense, really focused on rehabilitation of infill development and aging neighborhoods, which is also really good to do neighborhood revitalization. But it's all of these things as a menu. And I think, unfortunately, this topic, very few people actually understand from beginning to end the cost of building a house. And we also have to understand you need different types of housing to be successful in every major city. I'm glad actually that the legislature has now picked this up as an issue that they're concerned about for the state. I think that actually is helpful to have statewide leaders thinking about these issues, because traditionally it was kind of left to cities alone to try to figure that out. So there's not a silver bullet, as I said. I hope that we can keep this. The good thing is right now, for the most part, I'm curious what your perspective is. It's been Democrats and Republicans both agree it should be something we address, which is healthy.
Sure.
Because as you know, not always is that the case. And so now we just have to, the nuance is, how do you find common ground on what the state should be doing, if anything, around creating more affordable housing?
And there's a balance too, as you mentioned. Municipalities have largely taken this on, at the local level, whether it's like reducing minimum lot sizes or, easing zoning restrictions in terms of commercial spaces for residential being able to go in, or different types of housing, new innovative types of construction, 3D, whatever
Renting
it might
houses,
be.
yeah.
But this is, a lot of that is done at the local level. And I think, to your point, the state has really picked up that we can't wait for thousands of municipalities to develop and adopt their own specific housing policy in order to, because we're in fact in a big shortage, right? I mean, there's got to be supply put into the market in terms of addressing the affordability. And so addressing at the state level, I think, is critical, at least giving some parameters and sharing some best practices about what works to get that housing market revved up again in the right way.
Yeah. So we're looking to the future here, towards the bicentennial in 2036. Right now, it seems like there's a lot of apartment buildings and McMansions being built. Doesn't seem like there's a whole lot in between, maybe in some areas, but and again, this is a lot of personal experience in Austin. That's a lot of what's happening. What do we need to do over the next 10 years to make sure that there is something that's not, a $1 million house or a rental apartment, something in the middle that families can afford and raise a family in, and, like you said, be happy?
Yeah. Well, I think Fort Worth has done a nice job of making sure we are working alongside developers and landowners that are interested in building single-family housing in newer parts of our city. But again, Fort Worth has that unique ability to say we also want to redevelop and reinvest in our inner city, in our neighborhoods. And I think our neighborhood revitalization program that we started in 2016 really focused on at-risk neighborhoods across our city. Investing additional money has been really effective in incentivizing private sector and homeowners to come back into a neighborhood and build in an area maybe they traditionally wouldn't have it considered. School quality is a big factor around that, especially in the inner city of whether it's San Antonio or Fort Worth or Houston, wherever it may be. And then, lastly, paying really close attention to middle America and middle income families to make sure they can really create generational wealth and opportunity by home ownership, which has traditionally always been a part of the American dream. Now, interestingly, there's a lot of debate over whether homeownership really should be that vehicle. I still think it should be. I think there's a lot of stability offered to a family. But I think that you're kind of seeing that discussion transpire.
I agree. I think, infill development, I'm glad that Fort Worth is focused on that, because it addresses so many other issues, whether it's food deserts or, in terms of people leaving to the exurbs or the suburbs or even further out, in order to be able to have an affordable place to live, that adds to commute time, which reduces on your quality of life. I mean, your mobility in terms of if you have 30 to 40 minutes to take your kid to childcare, and then you've got to go to work after that, then you have to meet the 6 o'clock deadline. All that adds to the stress and a financial stress and also just an emotional stress over time. So we can do more for this infill development. I think that would be very helpful and address a lot of different issues at once as well.
Yeah. AJ, what happens to the Texas Miracle if the jobs are there, the GDP is, it's trucking along, everyone looks at that, feels good about that, but families can't find a stable place to live?
Yeah.
By that, I mean, it could be that, they're just having to move a lot and just that chaos,
I mean, I think, jobs is one thing, but I think it's jobs with family sustaining wages and I love that we've used that as kind of a goalpost for ourselves, where we want jobs that have family sustaining wages over time. And the only way that we see to do that is better connectivity in the educational system, going from K-12 all the way through our post-secondary and then ensuring those individuals are matched with an employer of choice that they're looking for over time. I think that's the only way to address some of those issues that you're talking about. And I think, and you mentioned this earlier too, Mayor, if we can achieve that and close those gaps in a quicker manner, my dream is that we flip the chart in terms of affordability and cost, right? In terms of what prices, in terms of the way they're increasing and the way wages are decreasing, or not decreasing, but just remaining stagnant in many ways. If we can flip that chart and create that a little more buffer between what individuals actually earn and what they have to actually pay, I think that will lead to that happiness quotient that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked a little bit about education earlier, workforce development and post-secondary, stuff like that. But obviously education starts, kindergarten, before that? It starts before that.
Yeah.
But, it starts, parents are always educating for sure, but outside the home, whatever. Let's talk about early childhood education. Mm-hmm. What does that look like, and what it needs to change so that by 2036 and beyond, we can, Texas miracle, who cares if we can't maintain it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So I'll try to simplify my feelings about this topic. And I've been really lucky to work around early education priorities for a long time. I want in Texas for us to acknowledge that good quality early education investments is economic development for the state of Texas. And let me explain that. And it's also great ROI. So across the United States, on average, these are averages. So you may have actual numbers, AJ, for Texas, but on average in the United States, we spend about $500 per pupil between the ages of 0 and 5 per year. Okay. Compare that to what we spend on K through 12 education. On average, it's around $11,000 to $12,000 per pupil. That would be fine if you didn't acknowledge that from 0 to 5, 90% of your brain development happens, right? And now we live in a country where 2-parent families or single-parent families are required to have a workforce that also can balance childcare. And as AJ mentioned earlier, $11,000 a year is not sustainable. We don't even have time to talk about the workforce crisis that is for early educators and how low wages are and really the turnover, et cetera. So at the big picture, the state of Texas has an opportunity to really reshape how we invest in quality early education as a state, really helping supplement families differently between the ages of 0 and 5, reshaping the way pre-K partnerships can work with school districts, and really using community-based care in a way that is holistic. Why does that matter? Because oftentimes when large school districts come in and build pre-K classrooms, what does a family do? They migrate their children into those pre-K classrooms, whether they're 3-year-old or 4-year-old, as quickly as possible because it's free. Yeah. So you end up bankrupting the local community-based care, and the cycle just perpetually continues. And that's why you have wait lists, especially for infant care up to age 3. So these are complex problems because, quite frankly, I don't think anybody has really wanted to do the lifting because you can't raise money off the issue. There's not a large lobby. No one really agrees on how to go about it. I think school districts really have just started to look at pre-K comprehensively in early childhood in the last 10 years. And, some do it better than others. And so it's going to take a really heavy lift. But to your point, you teeing this up, it really is vitally important to the long-term success of the state of Texas, of how we treat our youngest learners. And I want to put an asterisk here. We also want to support families and parents as a child's first teacher and provide incentives for families. If they want to keep their child at home, that's wonderful. Let's provide them educational resources comprehensively. But we've spent too much time arguing and not enough on solutions. And as a result, we are behind. And I think thanks to Texas 2036 and other organizations, you're starting to see statewide leaders really pick this up as an issue that really is economic development.
Yeah, I'd agree, Brad. I think, and I agree with you, Mayor. I think early childhood, now that the governor's got this new task force that's focused on it in terms of what are the scalable solutions statewide, and also there's 4 agencies currently that are in some shape or form overseeing childcare throughout the entire state. That's not even to mention the workforce boards. We have 29 or so workforce boards across the entire state that are also responsible for childcare.
Which, by the way, most of their budget goes towards childcare.
That's right.
29 workforce boards and
local workforce boards across the entire state.
4 state agencies?
That's right. So
That's a lot. That's a lot.
So we do see that as an opportunity where government performance could come in, because we do see it as a systemic vulnerability, right? Where we want to have more. We want the state and those agencies to work better together and address the affordability issue over time. And I think part of the commission's charge is to look at that in addition to what programs are working out there, and also just to get we know very little about childcare in terms of data in general right now. We have data in certain places, and then there's places that we don't have it at all. So that's part of what we're trying to figure out in order to attack the problem, not just throw stuff up on the wall and or try to throw money at something where there's no solutions toward it.
Yeah.
And it's not just a government solution here. I mean, the private sector has a very important role to play in helping support families and workforce differently. Whether that's providing, here in the city of Fort Worth, we're very proud to provide 12 weeks of paternity leave to all of our employees, which is a game changer for families to feel like they can start healthy as a workforce. And then importantly, some companies decide on-site childcare is something they want to do. They have dependent care accounts. There's a holistic opportunity here for us to partner with private sector on what works for their workforce also. But where, in my opinion, where the state of Texas really needs to focus is on what quality early education really looks like. Especially any dollar we spend in the state of Texas should only be focused on quality. This is not about babysitting. This is on quality education and really setting up a child for success as they go into kindergarten.
So we've talked a lot about sort of the family life, quality of life, the cost of things, cost of childcare, $11,000 a year. Making sure that, and you mentioned that parents as first educators. Is there room for making that an option where it doesn't have to be a two working parent households in the future? I feel like a lot of parents feel like that's necessary. And I don't know if it's a cultural shift, if there's policy shifts, economic shifts, but make it to where if that's something a family wants to do. I was a stay-at-home dad for almost 10 years, so it was a choice that I made. If they want to do that where it's a little bit easier, and then they don't have to worry about that $11,000 a year, and then they are the first educators and all those things.
Well, I think that's to your point about why family-sustaining wages are so important.
Yeah.
If you focus on family-sustaining wages, you're giving families a choice.
An option.
An option. Is in those situations, you have a two-parent household, they get to kind of sit down and decide what is best for their family at that time. And I think that is so important. And those are complicated questions, especially with wage stagnation right now. But I have seen, candidly, a resurgence of that interest from families of, could we go back to a time where there is more balance?
Yeah.
And I totally respect that.
Sure.
Our family has only been as functional because of support I've had, and we have multiple generations living in my house. Sounds like you do too in your household. And so I think there's a lot of beauty in that. And I think for Texas 2036 to talk about that is very important as a priority for the state.
Yeah, what you don't want is instability. I think where you have a mother and father, that both have to work, and as a result of the cost of childcare or the unavailability of it in a certain community, have to move that child around and try to scramble in order to do that, or for that matter, not able to go to work as a result of having to take care of the child because their child care falls through in some shape or form. We've estimated that it costs the state, about $11.4 billion per year in productivity, a loss of productivity as it relates to the whole child care issue.
Yeah. So we've focused a lot in this conversation about, and I mean, naturally, you're the mayor of the fastest growing large city, right? And so it makes sense. We've focused a lot about urban families and things like that, but there's a whole rural area in Texas as well, and there's got to be that balance. And I'm sure that Texas policymakers, AJ, you probably and you as well, Mayor Parker, you probably interact with them on a regular basis, and that's probably a challenge. What works here may not work there, or these two different cultures, all this different stuff. How do we balance that?
I'm incredibly positive about it. I grew up as a small town kid. The hometown I grew up in is 1,500 people. I had 42 kids in my graduating class. I'm oftentimes back in my hometown at least once a month to go to the ranch. And I see that technology has been a huge opportunity for small communities. Rural Texas right now understands their critical importance to the overall Texas economy. and the U.S. economy. And let's just take agriculture, for instance, and
Yeah.
our refocus on our food systems and the importance of ag in agriculture in our farming communities. I think they see a place of real importance and stability for the Texas economy, which I think is incredibly healthy. And, I also have seen, especially post-COVID, I know you probably saw this also, this real interest in rural tourism and people getting out of the city and really getting an opportunity to see a different side of Texas. And our state parks investment is also an incredibly healthy part of that.
Yeah.
Texas is an incredible state, rich in resources, and it doesn't all just rest in our urban environments. And so I think the important part from a legislative perspective is those conversations between urban and rural legislators have to continue. I've seen a still emphasis in making sure those legislators are still in powerful positions. A great example would be currently, I think today is actually the hearing, our state affairs chairman is Ken King, who is from Canadian Texas in the Panhandle. That's a very powerful position that, over the years of committee chairmanships, you always have a good cross-section of people. Another great example would be Senator Robert Nichols, who's now retiring, but was longtime Senate Transportation, but he's, from East Texas, a smaller community. So I think those voices are very important to create balance in the state of Texas and not to create that rural urban divide. Because honestly, this is something across the country we're talking about. I just came back from a conference at Notre Dame, and a lot of their political science department and their democracy initiatives were around the importance of creating connection between urban and rural for the United States moving forward. So I'm still bullish on it.
And I like what you said about visiting our rural communities for fun also. I mean, my family spent a couple of summers ago, it was kind of our last hurrah as the unit of 5 because my daughter was going off to get married. So we spent the summer, or we spent a couple, 3 or 4 days in Salado together. And I thought that was terrific. My wife and I just came back from Big Bend and spent Valentine's Day in Valentine, Texas, population 73,
Love
which
it.
was really fun.
Yeah.
But going to your point, rural communities, a few years ago represented about 3 million population. And if you think about that population in totality, it's bigger than 40% of our U.S. states in Texas alone.
Yeah.
So what you said, Mayor, about connectivity, I think is really critical. So the ability for those individuals to get to and from our urban centers, if they or us to go from the urban centers to those communities, I think is really critical. And I think you see that across the state. I've been very pleased to see whether it's going to Abilene, 3 or 4 weeks ago, to other rural communities. There's just like this explosive growth happening everywhere in the state, including most of our rural communities as well. I mean, when we did that Big Pen trip, we tried to stop in Bernie and Fredericksburg, and it was too crowded
To stop.
There was that many people there on a weekend.
Yeah.
And so it was great to see that. But you're also seeing this construction happening all over with these infrastructure improvements that we're making throughout the entire state. In many ways, it's a little bit of ripping the Band-Aid off because of the surge of funding that has gone into essentially addressing those issues. But I think it'll be well worth it over time.
So, Mayor Parker, I want to ask, what does Texas get right about supporting families that other states don't?
I still think we're an incredibly family-friendly state. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean, people are encouraged to have children. We integrate families into all of our ways of life. It's very uncommon for you to walk in a place and not feel like kids are welcome or families aren't welcome. And I think that is unique here in the state of Texas. In fact, I know that because I've been told that by people that have moved to Fort Worth. They're like, man, there are kids everywhere, right? And people are so kind and they want you to be a part of their community. And I think we need to define family as very broadly too. What is family looks different to a lot of different people, and welcoming and kindness is at the center of that. And I think Fort Worth really leads the charge in that in many ways. AJ might argue with me about San Antonio, but I
think we're both big cities, small towns.
Yeah,
like
and that's it. We are
past.
intentional about that. We want to maintain this small town feel at the same time being this wonderful metropolitan place that offers all the things a large city has.
Do y'all think just because Fort Worth and San Antonio is bigger than Austin, y'all can ignore me?
Well, you're not defending yourself, so we're.
So, I'm curious if you have a vision for Texas families for when you think about the next 10 years or so, 5-10 years, what's a vision that you have for Texas families?
I think
What does
it's
that look like?
overall prosperity and promise that Fort Worth and really Texas offers them that, right? That is a place where they continue to grow and thrive and find their American dream. And I think if Texas centers themselves on that, our individual spirit is incredibly vibrant in Texas. We enjoy people having their own path and they can kind of choose their own way in Texas. And I think if we focus on what opportunity can exist in prosperity is very important. And at the center of that are all the topics we talked about: education, economic development, quality of services. That will still maintain true as long as we're focused on those big levers. And again, the state is that kind of the adage, we're open for business, also means we're open for families. And I think that's the long-term vision. It seems to me that Texas continues to have as a priority.
I think the way we judge how the economy is doing is how our own family is doing.
Yeah.
In many ways, and I think what we talked about earlier, if we invest in that human infrastructure, as much and as urgently as we invest in the physical infrastructure, whether that's roads and broadband and water, et cetera, it's going to do it will be the opportunity for Texas to keep rising in the ranks of the top economies in the world.
So final question, what's one thing that Texans, whether it's just regular Texans like myself or policymakers or whoever, what's one metric that they should be looking at to know that the next generation is going to be doing better than they are and by 2036?
Educational attainment.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, 100%. Post-secondary, especially attainment and closing that gap.
Yeah. You know, those critical points where we're measuring in Texas, what are our third grade reading outcomes look like, eighth grade math, high school graduation, post-secondary attainment. If those continue to click upward and we're focused where we need to be, the future of Texas is incredibly bright. And I'm very proud that we, the collective we in Texas, took a really hard look in the mirror and acknowledged we were not where we needed to be and that we're at the bottom in terms of competitiveness and educational attainment in the state in America, and we want to be at the top.
Yeah.
And I know that we've now kind of striving toward that. It'll take a lot of hard work and focus, but I'm confident we can get there.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Mayor Mattie Parker, AJ Rodriguez, thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all being here.
Thank you. Welcome to Fort Worth. Glad you were here.
Thank you. Yeah. So the future of Texas won't be decided only by growth or economic headlines. It will be decided by something more fundamental. Can families build stable, hopeful lives here? That means safe communities, attainable homes, strong pathways for children, and a sense that the future is within reach. That's the work ahead as Texas approaches its bicentennial in 2036. If you would like to learn more about Texas 2036, visit texas2036.org. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our guests.
Thank you.